And it's very frustrating. And it's indicative of a much bigger problem, which is that the corruption at the elite levels of society, which is agnostic to your political bent, whether you are left, right, or moderate, right in the center, all of us can look around and just use our senses and use our brains to know that there's a lot of corruption in the world. Epstein is a notorious figure. He was linked for the longest time to kind of this conspiratorial idea of an elite ring of child traffickers who are attached to like billionaires and actors. And there's all these names that have been associated. And there are some things that we know, like he is directly linked to some former presidents, including President Clinton in a significant way. And at some level, President Trump. And of course, if you're on the left side politically, then you point at his ties to Trump and the time spent at Mar-a-Lago, and you kind of ignore the Bill Clinton of it all. And if you're on the right, you say, no. When Trump found out he was a creep, he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago, and you focus on the Bill Clinton of it all because we're politically polarized and can't get anything done. Wow. Maybe we should just focus on the real potential harm, because Jeffrey Epstein was in prison until he killed himself. If you're listening only, that was in air quotes, because that's a giant conspiracy in its own. And do I know? No, I don't know. I do know there's a lot of shady dealings around this. There are a lot of people potentially tied to this. And once again, we were teased. You know, we were the donkeys, and there was the long carrot, and there was a stick at the end. And are you ever going to get the carrot? No, of course not. It's just there to keep your attention. And they said it's going to be a bombshell report, and this has been in the courts for a long time, and we're going to get the unredacted names. And what we actually got were just stories we've already heard before. And so maybe they give a little more validity to them. A lot of people, if you're like me, have questions like, why aren't the people who we know about and we've known about almost our whole lives, why aren't they ever in court for this? Like, when is anybody going to pay for this in any reasonable way, right? But yeah, it was just a bombshell that didn't explode, and nothing really came out, and it left people very frustrated. And so let's look at this article. It says, what's in the Epstein docs so far? Federal court documents pertaining to the late convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein were unsealed on Wednesday pursuant to a December order from Manhattan federal judge Loretta Pleska, and are expected to reveal the names of more than 150 of the financier's associates, some of whom are already known. Shortly after the first documents were uploaded to the host site, however, traffic caused the website to crash. According to a report published by the New York Times shortly after the documents were unsealed, Epstein was the only person who has been incriminated. As has long been expected, both former President Trump and Clinton were named in the document, but neither accused of any crime. Trump's appearance in the document was particularly innocuous, coming up only as an offhand remark made by Epstein. Clinton's mentions were a little less benign, however, when asked during a 2016 deposition about Epstein's relationship with the former president. Epstein victim said that Epstein said one time that Clinton likes them young, referring to girls. Anyway, all of this is we just already know it. There's nothing new. And it's very frustrating. And it's indicative of a much bigger problem, which is that the corruption at the elite levels of society, which is agnostic to your political bent, whether you are left, right, or moderate, right in the center, all of us can look around and just use our senses and use our brains to know that there's a lot of corruption in the world. We know that in part because there is corruption inside of all of our hearts. And if we're honest, which a lot of people aren't, but if you are willing to get honest with yourself, you know the depths that you're able to go in your own mind. And you know the terrible thoughts that you've had at times in your past. And you know that we are all full of sin and we are all depraved at some level. We're all jacked up and we're all in need of a savior. And then you have this kind of maxim that seems to prove itself out, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the more the top levels of power become insulated from any kind of consequence, the more corruption seems to fester and grow. And it's very frustrating when we feel like there's nothing we can do about it. Like, everybody knows about Clinton, and we've seen the picture of him being massaged in an airport, I guess, by a woman who was abused by Epstein. We know this. And it's like we're not asking any questions. I mean, we're asking questions, but no one in power is asking any significant questions. There is financial corruption. I mean, we know a large percentage of senators and Congress people, they go in and they're just, they're making good money. I mean, I would take their salary for sure, 140 grand or something like that. I would take that salary, right? You probably would too. But now they're worth tens of millions. I think Nancy Pelosi, $100-something million, and it's insider trading, and you would go to prison for it, and they don't, because there's corruption, and we feel like there's nothing we can do about it. And so how do we live in a world and not lose our minds when we know there's corruption, and it seems like there's no way for it to be uncovered? Here's the hope we have as believers. Undiscovered sin will have a devastating effect whether it is discovered or not. Here's what the psalmist wrote in Psalm 32. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night, your hand was heavy on me, and my strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not cover up my iniquity. And I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. And we know this. I mean, even atheist, secular writers, they know this. And some of the great Russian novelists of the past, they would write about this, like in the great novel Crime and Punishment. You see this guy and he decides he's an atheist, and yet the sin that he committed, in this case a murder, it just literally eats him alive. It is Psalm 32 laid out across hundreds of pages of some of the best narrative you could ever possibly read. And it's making the case that there is something transcendent weighing on us when we have undiscovered sin in our life. It also just is worth mentioning that our innate sense of justice is a powerful reason for you to consider that there is in fact a transcendent God. When we look at the rumors of the Jefferey Epstein enterprise, and there's a lot of questions to be asked, like who was he working for, and how did he have this cover for so long? And people under testimony, certified testimony, have said that he was part of intelligence, but we don't know what country's intelligence. And a lot of people think this was just a blackmail operation to get people in compromising positions and then be able to hold power over them. And Bill Gates seems to have lost his marriage over his connection to Epstein. There's all of these questions about this, but at the core, we feel it is an injustice. We feel that it is true corruption and justice should be done, and we should know those answers. And that innate sense of justice is pointing to an objective morality and an objective ethic in the world. And for there to be an objective morality and an objective ethic, regardless of what Sam Harris says, tying himself in knots, trying to create objective morality without a transcendent God, if you're paying attention, what Sam Harris, the famous atheist, does is he just makes himself God. And he defines what morality is, and then everyone falls under it. And he defines what well-being is, and he defines what ethics are. It's not objective, because if Sam Harris were to be removed from the picture, then his view of quote-unquote objective morality would go with him. If there is a God, there is true justice and true injustice, true morality and true immorality. And this desire for us to see justice done in this situation is pointing us toward something transcendent. And there's more. If you are atheist or agnostic at best, and you're not convinced of the reality of the God of the Bible, then if there is not justice done during our time on earth, justice will never be done. And that's bad news, because as corrupt as things are and as insulated as the top elites of society are from consequence, you might not ever see justice done in many, if not most, of the corruption going on in our world. But for believers, we can live confident that there will be justice, even if that justice never comes while we're here on earth. In Luke, Jesus said, there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed. There's nothing hidden that will not be made known. What you've said in the dark will be heard in the daylight. And we do believe that everyone, including Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and any of the other people who may have been involved in this, whether they are discovered or not, all humans' destiny end at the same transitional point, which is standing before a holy and completely just God and getting our due. And the hope for believers is that our sin will have been covered by the grace of Jesus and his sacrifice on the cross. And because of that, when you have experienced that grace, you will feel like the psalmist, where you go, whatever's hidden, I got to bring it into the light. And when I bring it into the light, I can finally start living the life that I was created to live. If you enjoyed this clip, make sure you check out the full podcast and subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay up to date with all new content. You can also support the channel at patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. Link is in the description below.